Today is May 22. I'm interviewing John Roland about his Vietnam experience. My name is Paul Robards, Library Director of Middle Georgia College. What dates of service in Southeast Asia did you have?
My in-country time aboard a swift boat was August of 1968 through August of 1969. Plus, my first tour of duty after graduation from the Naval Academy was on board the USS Perkins, DD-877, and we provided gunfire support off of the North and South Vietnam on at least two occasions.
Why did you join the military?
I was interested in a military career. I wanted to serve my country. My father was a retired military chief warrant officer, and I desired to be a Naval Academy graduate.
What was your job description or MOS?
For my time in country in Vietnam, I was officer in charge, O&C, of a swift boat, a PCF, Patrol Craft Fast.
What was your rank during this time?
Lieutenant JG, junior grade.
What events or engagements were you involved in?
Initially, the swift boats were set up to prevent resupply by North Vietnam and Viet Cong to support the VC forces in South Vietnam. We were set up as strictly a coastal patrol initially when I got there, and then a few months after that, we started conducting Sea Lords raids, which were into all the rivers of the Mekong Delta. My division, Coastal Division 13, was based at Cat Lo, C-A-T-L-O, and we not only did our offshore patrolling, but also conducted numerous Sea Lords raids with support from either Navy SEALs and or provincial reconnaissance units, PRUs, headed by a Navy SEAL, or occasionally transporting a few South Vietnamese troops. As to specific campaigns, gosh, I really don't remember. But we then took over patrol areas in the Delta, in the rivers, when Operation Slingshot went into effect, and PBRs, Patrol Boat Rivers, which had assumed these patrol stations, were moved up near the Cambodian border to support these. So we had patrol stations in the rivers and off the coast.
Did your training prepare you for the duties required of you in Southeast Asia?
Yes, my crew, which consisted of 5 American enlisted men, and myself received swift boat training at the amphib base in Coronado, and I want to say it's between 6 and 8 weeks.
What kind of weapons were you trained in the use of?
Well, we had small arms on board, and the swift boat itself was armed with a twin 50 caliber machine gun and a gun tub over the pilot house, and a single 50 caliber machine gun and over an 81 millimeter mortar on the fantail. I think we had a 38 caliber revolver, a shotgun, and an M79 grenade launcher, which I used on missions, and an M16.
Did you volunteer to go to Vietnam?
I was an eager volunteer. I wrote my detailer, who handled personnel duties for all Navy officers. On at least 2 occasions, And I still have a carbon copy of one of the letters I sent him. So I was an eager volunteer to go, and I wanted to go to swift boats. And fortunately, I got my choice.
How did your family feel?
I think, I'm sure it worried my mother, and I'm sure my parents had some concern for my safety, but they were able to survive my tour of duty.
Were you in a combat or combat support unit?
I was in a combat unit.
Describe your first encounter with the enemy.
My first raid was off an LST station down off the Khao Mau Peninsula, which served as a forward support base for swift boats. So 3 or 4 of boats were transferred down there from our base, and my first raid was down in that area. We didn't see the enemy on any occasion during my raids because they were either hidden or didn't choose to fight at the time. I don't recall any return fire from that very first encounter. We shot up any sampans, huts, whatever, of anything of military value. That was my first raid.
Evaluate the enemy's overall fighting ability. What were their overall strengths and weaknesses?
Well, they were definitely a dedicated force, and I don't think I'm qualified to say just how proficient they were in their operations. They were obviously a well-indoctrinated fighting unit when they chose to fight.
Describe the bravest action, either friend or enemy, that you witnessed while serving in Vietnam.
I guess the action I was involved with another swift boat, in which I was awarded the Navy Cross in the rescue of the officer in charge of the other swift boat and his leading petty officer, who were blown off the boat due to a rocket hit, and the rescue of them. The award is easily found on the internet. I've been told by my academy classmates and some family members who've looked it up. I haven't even bothered, but it's readily available on the internet, the full citation.
What is your evaluation of the South Vietnamese fighting units and the military and civilian leaders?
Well, I can only comment on what I had read. My only first-hand contact with South Vietnamese naval personnel was on the first ship. We would occasionally have a South Vietnamese junior officer on board for indoctrination and showing what we were doing. And the ones we had, there were only a couple of them, were not very impressive, either dedication-wise or professionally. For each patrol, I had a South Vietnamese enlisted man to serve as an interpreter. Some were good, some were terrible, some got seasick and wanted to go back to port, which I refused to do. So it varied. But the most impressive South Vietnamese military person I can recall was a policeman from the provincial capital of Ben Tre. I even remember his name. And he was excellent, thorough, because we would stop large sampans carrying cargo and civilian personnel, primarily women and children. And we would search the boats, the sampans, and check IDs. And he's the only one that I could really rave about and say that always did an excellent job.
What is your evaluation of American military leadership in Vietnam and of your immediate commanders in the field?
My commanding officers, of which I had two, were okay. One was a lieutenant, a Mustang. The other was a lieutenant commander. We did go to my division, which was one of the two divisions conducting Sea Lords raids, were invited to Saigon for a briefing slant pep talk from Admiral Zumwalt, who was in charge of naval forces in country at the time. I think everyone was fairly impressed with him, but for comments on anybody other than those, I can only say that my opinion is influenced by what I've read.
What do you remember most about combat?
It was a busy time. I never felt overly concerned for my welfare. I was more concerned about doing my job and hopefully getting my crew and boat back to base safely and to conduct our mission properly.
Describe the most difficult challenge you faced as a swift boat commander.
I think leadership of my crew, and during the monsoon season, it was absolutely miserable out there for a swift boat, which only had about a 4-foot draft, and we just got pounded to hell out and back during monsoon when you were going against the seas. Coming back, after you get to the end of your patrol station, turn around and head back with a following sea, it was a much smoother ride. But heading into the seas in a monsoon season in the South China Sea is absolutely terrible. And then getting into the river mouths during that time was probably some of the most white-knuckle experiences I had, because of shifting sandbars in the river mouths, and it was so shallow in there, and our depth finder was, it was adequate most of the time, but you'd just come rolling in with a following sea, trying to get into the river mouth, and just hope you didn't hit a unseen sandbar. It would have been a mess. Because when you had that following seas in shallow water, we absolutely lost steering control and we were just doing the best we could to avoid the whitecaps that were breaking over sandbars and trying to get into the river mouths so we could get to our patrol station and relieve the other boat that was there either waiting for us or had already passed us heading back to base.
At the time you were serving in Vietnam, did you think you understood the big picture of the politics and diplomacy of both the United States and Vietnam?
I doubt it. I've read a good deal since then. I and my crew believe, what we were told, that, we were there to support a South Vietnamese government that wanted to maintain democracy and give them a chance to be a democracy in fighting and helping them fight a communist takeover of their government. Of course, since with all the other reading I've done, it looks like we were supporting at times a very corrupt, incompetent set of leaders on the South Vietnamese side and some less than impressive U.S. military officers. I hope that doesn't take away from all the valor and excellent dedication and professionalism by a lot of other U.S. military officers that served there. But sometimes you just remember the knuckleheads more than anybody else.
What did you think of the native population of Vietnam?
We saw the peasants, and I came to the conclusion that in the Delta, the only thing that they were interested in was fishing, farming, and fornicating. And they really didn't care what was going on in the Saigon unless it directly affected them. And they would be most willing to go with either side that was going to give them some peace and help in their prosperity.
What was your daily routine while in Vietnam?
We started out with our coastal patrols, where it'd be a 24-hour, one overnight patrol, then return to base. Depart in the morning, go to our patrol station, and then return the following morning. Then when we picked up river patrols, because of the transit time, the distance between our base and the patrol stations, we would be out for 2 nights, 2 full days, and then return on the probably the afternoon of the 3rd day when we got relieved. And when we got back to base, first thing we did was, refuel, rearm, get ready to go out again, or we may turn the boat over to another crew. The boats we had were the Mark I's, the oldest boats that were in Vietnam. And they were just being worn out. So sometimes boats would be in repair, having mechanical problems taken care of at the base. We had a maintenance crews there. We didn't always keep the same boat. I must have used at least 3 different boats during my time there because we were swapping around. But we had a little galley on board, so we did the best we could with meals, which were absolutely paltry. We'd head out on patrol with nothing but a hunk of salami, some cheese, and a couple of cans of soup or tomatoes or something like that, and a loaf of bread. And we'd just make do. These sea rations, which we had on board, I would not allow my crew to use at all. That was kept for emergencies. In fact, sea rations were an absolute luxury. So we'd mix some kind of breakfast, patrol, stop anybody that was coming through our patrol area. board search, check IDs. That would be done for both coastal and in-river patrols. Our days off, we would do anything we had to do for our boat if we were going to be keeping that for a while. And then we have some time off. If we were doing a coastal patrol, come in the afternoon, we may have had a patrol to go out the next day. In fact, I think that's normally what we did. We were out the next day. So during my year in country, I had kept a count of the number of patrols I had, and I don't know where that counting is, but I think I was up over 120 patrols during a 1-year period.
Describe the most memorable event that happened during your tour.
Well, that would be the ambush and rescue of the officer in charge and his leading petty officer out of a canal while suppressing enemy fire. His boat was hit with either a B-40 rocket or an RPG, and so was mine. And we were able to rescue them under fire and medevac them out, and no lives were lost. Describe
the most humorous event that happened to you.
I don't recall much humor at all. I can't recall a single humorous incident during my tour. I'm sure there must have. We had a couple of USO shows come through, and one was a Korean Army with a couple of Korean dancers. I remember that little show more than anything else. For humor or entertainment, we'd go into Vung Tau, the provincial capital of Phuc Tuy province where we were located. Plus, that was one of the several in-country R&R centers. And we'd I'd go in with some other ONCs, or maybe even go in by myself and go around, check out the bars and the bar girls. And other than that, we didn't have much. We did have R&R options. I know the most desirable one was to Australia. You had to be in country 10 months before you could go there. That's where I chose to go. And I even went back just prior to leaving Vietnam for another 1-week R&R to Australia, Sydney.
Did you notice or encounter any type of racial, social, or rank discrimination?
No.
Were you aware of any illegal drug use among American soldiers in Vietnam?
No. I wouldn't even allow my crew to drink a beer or anything while on patrol. There was nothing. In fact, I made them wear uniforms instead of looking like a bunch of ragtag slobs. I had them in their regular sailor dungaree uniforms.
What song or music reminds you of your service in Vietnam?
Can't think of a thing.
Did you correspond with family and friends during your tour?
I wrote my parents. That was it.
Did you keep a journal or diary?
No, I didn't, which I deeply regret.
Did you bring back any souvenirs or pictures from Vietnam?
Yes, I did. I had a little Instamatic Eastman Kodak camera that I took pictures with, and I have over 100 slides that I took, plus some that I've been given. I left my good camera back in the States and only used that one.
How did you feel about your experience when you left Vietnam?
I was convinced that the South Vietnamese were going to lose the war within 5 years. And I took them actually 6 years to lose the whole thing. They were not dedicated. They really didn't care. The personnel that I could see, they just didn't care. They were perfectly willing to allow the Americans to do all their fighting for them as long as they could continue with the 3 F's of life, and very disappointed in the South Vietnamese Navy, who received the brand new Mark II swift boats, and I never saw one on patrol. What I did see were them tied up to a fishing stake, just doing nothing and fishing, and punch a hole in their 1/4-inch aluminum hull, which made them useless. But that was a very sore point. We were doing all the operations, patrolling, and we were using the old Mark I's, and they were just being absolutely worn out. Max speed was supposed to have been 25 knots, and if I ever got 21 knots out of my boat, I felt I was doing very good. Of course, it slowed down when you get a full fuel load and ammo load, but poor things were just worn out.
How did you feel after you arrived back in the United States?
Great. Well, I was relieved to have completed my tour of duty with a little bit of success, safely. None of my crew was wounded. I thought we had done our job as best we could. I can recall on the flight when we left Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base in Saigon. I think it was a Braniff Airlines, and every seat filled with enlisted and officers. Were all in khakis or some other uniform. In fact, I even had at least two my Naval Academy classmates were on board with me, who had served in some other capacity. And just as soon as the wheels were drawn up into the aircraft and off the Vietnamese soil, we all let out a big cheer. Plus, when we landed in California, I'm sure we stopped in probably Midway or Guam for fuel, and then I know we stopped in Honolulu for a short time for more fuel, and I can't recall the Air Force Base in California. And as soon as we landed in California, we all burst out with another cheer. We were quite happy to be home.
How do you feel now about your service in Vietnam?
Well, I'm glad I volunteered. I'm glad I served. I don't have any regrets. Oh, I regret I couldn't have done even a better job than I did. But I'm glad I served. And I'll leave it up to the politicians to determine whether or not it was worth it. It's highly debatable.
Do you feel that the war affected your marital status?
Well, I was single at the time, and so it had no effect.
If you had your Vietnam War experience to do over again, what, if anything, would you do differently?
After 1 year with swift boats, I was physically worn out. I think I was down to about 121 pounds. So I was glad to get a break, but I also volunteered to go back. From my postgraduate education, we were promised by our detailer, all swiftboat ONCs could get any billet we asked for. Well, they had assigned me to postgraduate school under an engineering curriculum at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. Well, my first tour after graduation was in the engineering department, and I was bound and determined I was not going to be an engineering officer and make the Navy my career. So they had already sent me these orders, and I went and I replied back, said I would rather go to intelligence school. And I came back and they gave me orders to intelligence school, Defense Intelligence School in Anacostia Annex, Washington, D.C. And I had a 9-month postgraduate equivalent education there, and I specifically volunteered. In fact, I even tracked down the Navy SEALs over in Alexandria in special operations and said, please ask for me. I want to go back and serve as an intel officer for a SEAL unit. And the lieutenant commander said, well, Lieutenant, that is a collateral duty among the Navy SEALs, so I can't do that for you. But I was eager to go back to Vietnam in that capacity if I could have served with a Navy SEAL unit as their intel officer. So I was ready to go back.
Is there anything that I've not asked you about that you would like to add about your Vietnam experience?
No, I think that's pretty well inclusive. I'm glad I went. I'm glad I volunteered. Glad I served. I had, at the time, I recall, I had 5 or 6 quite idealistic reasons for going there. And I know one of them was so that my brother, who was graduating from West Point in 1970, might not have to go, but he did go, and my mother survived his tour of duty also. I don't recall all the reasons, but it was a time of testing, time to prove what you could do under a combat situation. I thought it was going to be exciting, an adventure, and we were given the option at the end of Swiftboat School of choosing what corps area we would like to go to and serve at one of the bases. We had Swiftboat bases in all 4 corps, and I specifically chose the Mekong Delta area, and that was, I thought that would be more interesting. I just couldn't see spending a whole year doing coastal patrols. That just seemed to be boring. And I thought there would be more action. It would be different. It'd be better than just simple 1 year of coastal patrols. Good gracious, I'd bore you to tears. And I got my wish. And I informed my crew. I don't recall consulting them in any way, but that's where I wanted to go. I got Mekong Delta, Coastal Division 13, based in Catlow, and I'm glad I got that.
Thank you for your service, sir, and thank you for participating in this project.
My pleasure.